Education, we're starting off with education. We're revising education according to the 2021 and onward syllabus. If we broadly have a look at a syllabus, it is divided into two parts. We have education and society over here, and then we have education and inequality, right? Today, we'd start off with theories about the role of education, and while discussing these theories about the role of education, I mean, initially, I tell you how we go about. Initially, we did discuss socialization, and we talk about how education is an agency that socializes individuals. And we talk about why it is essential, why is it that it was considered that education system as a whole should be introduced. And then we'd hop on towards the different theories that we're referring to over here. And while talking about these theories, we would start off with functionalism, we'd talk about Marxism, we would talk about um, the New Right perspective, and we talk about the social democratic perspective or social democratic theory over here, right? The New Right theory, the Marxist theory, and the functionist theory, right? Now, these are the four different theories that we would be taking into consideration today. And yeah, let's start. To start off with education. Now, everyone knows what socialization is. When you talk about socialization, socialization is a process that changes a human being into a social being. Everyone by now should know, should have an idea as to how the socialization process starts at home, right? The socialization process starts at home, and it's our family primarily that socializes us. And then slowly and gradually, with the passage of time, there are other agencies that contribute towards that contribute towards our socialization process as well. To name them, we have our peer group, we have the education system, we have media, we have religion, so on and so forth. Now, when we talk about education as an agency that socializes individuals, you know what? Your family does teach you all the basics. Your family gives you an identity, tells you who you are, what the color of your skin is, teaches you the basic do's and don'ts. But then again, there is stuff that your family might not be able to do justice with, especially after modernization, after industrialization. There was a lot more that was expected from individuals to know, and that is when it was assumed, it was considered to be important for a formal education system to be introduced, right? Now, the relationship between formal education systems and the economy is not as simple as it apparently appears to be. It is pretty complex. Oh yes, it is, with a range of different dimensions that are involved over here. The structure and organization of education system reflects, number one, different ideological beliefs. Now, we're talking about the structure and the organization of education system. How is it that the education system is structured, and how is it that the education system as an organization operates, right? It reflects a lot of things. For instance, it reflects different ideological beliefs, right? It reflects, I mean, that we give to the education system, the meaning that we give to education, rather. If you talk about the Marxist perspective, they'd have a different explanation to it. If you talk about the functionist perspective, they perhaps have a different explanation to it, so on and so forth. We talk about the different purpose of education, like I just mentioned. Different sociological perspectives would have different stances over what the purpose of education system is. Now, for instance, if we talk about the functionist perspective, since they believe every institution plays a very positive role for the society, for the betterment of society, in that case, for them, it's the education system as well has a very positive contribution towards the society. Likewise, when we talk about the Marxist perspective, according to the Marxist perspective, the different structures that we have in the society, they all work towards benefiting the capitalist system. And guess what? In that case, they claim that the education system does that as well, right? We'd further move on and talk about the relationship that the education system has with other social institutions, because you know what, we cannot just assume that the education system exists or operates in a vacuum. We cannot just isolate the education system as a structure from the other institutions that are there around, that we have around, right? Now, another dimension that could help us understand this complexity better is by comparison of the economic systems of production, distribution, and exchanges throughout history. Moving on, let's talk about the mass education, a feature of most modern industrial societies. I'd want everyone to read through this. You read through this once and then we'd proceed. Now, taking this a step further, if we talk about what is it that led to the development of mass education or the development of a formal education system, you know what? In order to have a better understanding of this, let's compare pre industrial societies with medieval societies. I'm sure it's written somewhere. Yeah. Let's compare the pre industrial societies with industrialization and then post industrialization. Do you know what? There was a time when education wasn't there for all. Education was considered to be there only for the children of the rich, the elite. And they usually did that through private tutoring. However, with the pass of time, as our society evolved from agrarian societies, we had, you all do know, from agrarian societies we had cottage industries, and these cottage industries then further moved on, and there was an industrial revolution. And when we had this industrial revolution, because of this industrial revolution, there were a lot of machines, there were a lot of people that were required to operate those machines, to work with those machines. You know what? Prior to that, pre-industrialization, this is what I was talking about, has to do with industrialization, when there were a lot of machines that had to be handled and taken care of. But if we talk about the pre-industrial era, especially if we talk about the agrarian era or the agriculture based societies, back then you didn't really need, or the society didn't really require a formal education system. They did not require a formal education system back then because they had, I mean, kids or the younger generation used to learn whatever the skills were that were required for them to be able to fit into the society from their parents, right? From their parents, their grandparents, from the people around them, right? Now, even if you talk about Pakistan, if you talk about our country, we live in a country that relies more on agriculture here, right? I'm sure you hardly must have come across anyone who has been to a university that caters to things such as harvesting and farming, right? I'm not saying there aren't any, because they are, right? We have a few in our province as well. But nonetheless, how many people do you know of who've actually attended this? If for the people who are there into agriculture and farming, they usually learn that through experience, right? And so was the case pre-industrialization. There were people who used to learn all of this through the people around, through the families, through the parents, right? Now, keeping that in mind, things changed. Agricultural societies changed to people who were relying on agriculture. Slowly and gradually, the society evolved, the society changed, and they, after industrialization, wanted to look for jobs. They wanted to look for jobs. They wanted to look for a substitute income, because cottage industry was definitely experiencing declines. अरे cottage industry decline हुई थी, क्यों हुई थी? आपके पास जो small scale पे लोग चीज़ें produce कर रहे थे, अब आपके पास massive scale पे बड़ी बड़ी industries आ गई थी, अब आपके पास factories लगना शुरू हो गई थी, और आपका पास, if there's a family who was relying on producing something on a small scale, they wouldn't really be able to compete with uh, big factories or huge industries that could produce better stuff at a cheaper rate, right? Now, when there was industrialization, there were skills that were required for people. People had to be skilled to be able to fit into the society, to be able to fit into the economics, to be useful to the economic system, right? And this is where it was seen, or this is where it was felt that a formal education system is an essential. This is where it was felt that a formal education system should be there, and people should get educated on a massive scale, on a mass. I mean, there should be mass education, there should be education for all. And it was in 1880s where education got compulsory in the UK. Of course, in countries like ours, it happened later, right? Now, I hope everyone gets this and everyone has read through this. Moving on, if we talk about, like I said, let's talk about the different perspectives. We talk about the different perspectives or the different theories, uh, and what do they have to say about how our education system works and operates. There were four different theories that I had referred to, that I had mentioned earlier. To start off with, we talk about functionalism, followed by Marxism, followed by the New Right theory, followed by the social democratic theory. Now, to start off with the functionist view on how the education system or how education contributes towards value consensus and social solidarity, right? Value consensus and social solidarity, all of us do know, has to do with, I mean, all of these ideas, they have been put forward by the functionist perspective, right? Now, if you all do remember functionalists refer to a social system. When we talk about the social system, we're referring to the society in general, right? We're talking about a social system, and this social system has a lot of subsystems that are connected to it, right? A social system that has a lot of subsystems that are connected to it, right? So functions see society as a social system consisting of different institutions, that is subsystems such as family, work, education, etc. And these institutions are functionally connected in two ways. Now, how is it that these institutions are connected? Number one, each institution performs certain essential functions such as providing the means of survival or a secondary function. Get it? One. Number two, to perform these functions, each institution needs certain things from other institutions. What we're trying to imply from here is, what this trying to imply over here is that all of these subsystems, they're interconnected, they're all interconnected to each other, they're all relying on each other, right? And in contemporary societies, the workplace requires a certain level of knowledge and skill. Of course, this is something that we just discussed. There is certain level of knowledge and skill that is required by people. It is considered to be pretty essential for people to be skilled, to have the knowledge, to be able to fit into the to this industrial society. Now, why is it that they need to know all of this and need to know all of this? So that they could have their own positive contribution towards the society, right? Now, the education system provides individuals with the necessary social and intellectual abilities. Now, how is it? Remember, my kids, we're discussing this under the heading of the functionist perspective. And according to the functionist perspective, every institution would have a positive, would have a beneficial role for the society. And guess what? Right now, we're talking about the education system the education system, and the education system is again another institution. So we're talking about the education system providing the necessary social as well as intellectual abilities to individuals, so that they help so that they help the society get better. Yeah. Now, according to the functionist perspective, one of the important functions that schools perform is to approve or accredit different levels of knowledge and skill. Now, let's put this through a simplistic manner, and all of this happens through the qualification system. Now, you're sitting over here studying your A2 sociology. I mean, A2, you're studying over here trying to prepare for your A levels examinations, the second level, and you're studying sociology as subject, right? Now, what the education system does is, the education system approves of, or it accredits your knowledge and skills. I mean, how does it do that? It does that by providing qualifications. How does it do that? It does that by testing you. It's not only about you just acquiring this knowledge. Guess what? You're sitting over here taking this class because in a few days you would have to sit for an examination for this, right? And it's through that examination, it's through that testing system that the education system gets to decide if you have that knowledge, if you have the skills that you ought to have to proceed further, or if you don't. Right? So, according to the functionist perspective, one of the important functions that schools perform is to approve or accredit different levels of knowledge and skills through qualification. Knowledge is accredited here when students pass on their examination and move to another higher level. This is what I just said. Functionist concept of all the institutions being dependent on each other. This is what we were discussing a couple of minutes back. All the institutions being dependent on each other fits in very well over here. You know what? The workplace requires people. The workplace requires people who have the right amount of knowledge, who have the right skills to work, right? If, I mean, an organization wouldn't hire people whom it thinks do not have the skills, whom it thinks do not have the knowledge that is essential for them to have. And in that case, when you talk about this dependency thing over here, don't you think the education system is playing its role in terms of providing the workplace with what it requires? A workforce that is skilled, a workforce that is knowledgeable enough, a workforce that does have the characteristics that are essential for the workplace to run. To remind you, we're studying all of this under the functions perspective over here, right? The workplace needs the education system to equip young individuals. We're talking about equipping young individuals with the knowledge and skills that are essential for them to be able to perform their allotted roles for society to function successfully. And I mean, there's a lot that I feel like adding up over here, but since we already do have that on the next few slides, we talk about role allocation, and then we'd be able to connect what we're discussing over here with that, right? Moving on. Functionalists explain the development of mass education in terms of functional differentiation. Now, institutions develop to perform particular functions such as work and education. If the needs of one institution are not being adequately met, tensions develop within the system that threaten its stability and ability to function. Now, I want everyone to give this a read again, right? What we're talking about is the institutions being dependent on each other. What we're talking about over here is the institutions making a point that they meet the requirement for one another, the institutions being interdependent. You know what? Let me explain this through an example. You know what? Like we just discussed, the family did used to do this when the family could. I mean, the family, remember, I'm referring to the agrarian era over here. The family did used to provide the knowledge, the skills that was essential for people to know, for people to have when it was when we had an agrarian society, when people used to rely more on agriculture. But then again, the society changed, the society evolved. And after there was industrialization, the family probably was not in a position to be able to cater to the needs of the economic system. The same family that once used to. What we're saying is, what rather functions are claiming over here is the same family now was considered to be not fit, a misfit according to what the requirements now were. Because guess what? The requirements had changed. We had an there was an industrial revolution that required people to be skilled in a different manner, right? And you know what? If you've understood this, if the needs of one institution are not being adequately met, tensions develop within the system. And these tensions, they threaten the stability and the ability to function. For example, industrial forms of work require a literate and numerate workforce. Without these skills, the economy cannot function. Institutions such as the family cannot meet this new requirement. So the stability of the system is threatened, right? And when the stability of the system is under threat, we have numerous options over here again. Number one, the existing institutions evolve. right? The existing institutions involve, or in other words, the existing institutions that we have over here, they bring in a change in a manner that they're able to meet the requirement, the new requirement here. But guess what? At times this works and at times it doesn't, right? No. So in that case, the family did till it could to help with providing for the economic system. But then you can evolve to an extent. And then it was seen that, I mean, another option that we have over here is, now what sort of options are we talking about over here? Like I said, the society, when the society is experiencing a threat, when there's instability in the society, this instability needs to be looked at, and stability needs to be restored. And this can either be done by the existing institutions evolving or new institutions arising, right? New institutions arising so that they, or new institutions developing so that they could meet the requirements of the society to restore stability. And this is how the formal education system developed according to the functionist perspective. Bang, right? Since existing institutions cannot evolve quickly enough or in all the necessary ways to deal with the new demands, at some point all societies develop a specialized set of institutions, education that can restore stability in such situations. We get this, right? Moving on, let's talk about how schools act as agents of secondary socialization. This is something that I had discussed a couple of minutes back, right at the beginning of the class as well. Now, when we talk about the functionalist theory or the functionalist perspective over here, they claim that schools act as agents of secondary socialization. I'll tell you how. You know what? It's There are norms that are taught to you at home, but then wider norms that have more to do with the society, the value system, the belief system that one has to be or should be a part of, the things that your family at times skips, or the things that you are not really able to study from your society, get to learn from your society. Now these things, they taught to you by the education system. Now what the education system does over here is, the education system helps you internalize the norms. Guess what? I'd like to stick to the example that we have over here. It was, for majority of you guys, it was the education system that taught you the significance of 23rd March, right? It was the education system that taught you about that taught you the national anthem, right? Now norms that are essential for you to be able to fit into the society, they are taught to you by the education system. And this pretty much explains how the education system, or why the functionists are claiming this to be, or claiming the education system to be, or claiming education in general to be an agent of secondary socialization. Now there are certain things that are taught to you in a pretty explicit manner, right, in a direct manner, and they're done through through your formal curriculum. Right now, for instance, whatever we're studying over here, this is a part of formal curriculum, right? However, when you're a part of the education system, when you are at school, there are numerous other things that you get to learn that are not directly a part of your curriculum, or that are not a part of your curriculum at all. For instance, I'm referring to the hidden curriculum over here. Now there are two terms that I've introduced over here: the curriculum and the hidden curriculum. I mean, when I talk about the curriculum, I'm referring to the formal curriculum that you're taught, that is a part of your syllabus, and then later on you test it, right? However, along with the formal curriculum, there are certain things that are taught to you through the hidden curriculum as well. And when we talk about the hidden curriculum over here, I mean, it could be something as simple as obedience to authority. It could be as something as simple as you knowing that there are different genders and how you need to act like being a male or a female, right? When you're part of the education system, there are things that are taught to you at school, but then when you are a part of the education system, the education system reinforces all of that, right? And this reinforcement, or the things such as the national anthem, such as the significance of, like I said, 23rd March, all of these things, they eventually bring in social solidarity amongst individuals, right? This brings in togetherness, a sense of unity in individuals, right? Individuals through this learn to accept their position in the society. If they're rich, they know where they stand. If they're not rich, they know where they stand, right? Now, I hope this is clear. Let's move on and talk about how the education system plays its role in terms of role allocation. Now, when we talk about role allocation over here, I'd like to talk about the tripartite system that was introduced in 1944 in the UK. What is this tripartite system all about? Tripartite, as the name shows, has to do with three, tri, one, two, three, right? Tripartite system. Now, this 1944 Education Reform Act, okay, so there was an Education Reform Act that was introduced in the UK in 1944. And according to this Education Reform Act, every child had to sit for a test at the age of 11, and this is why this was also known as the 11 plus exam. And this test had to do with intelligence, right? Every child had to sit for an exam at the age of 11, and this test was based on intelligence, and based on the results of the test, children were sent to three different schools, three different type of schools, right? For instance, for the academically able, we had grammar schools. For the students who were better with technical abilities, we had secondary technical schools. And for the ones who were less academically able, we had secondary modern schools, right? We're talking about the tripartite system that was introduced in 1944 through the Education Reform Act. What it said was every child had to sit for an exam at the age of 11, known as the 11 plus exam, and based on the results of the exam, they were sent to three different types of schools. The kids who were academically able were sent to grammar schools. The kids who were better with technical abilities were sent to the technical schools, and the kids who were less academically able, they were sent to secondary modern schools, right? Now, why is it that we are studying this under the heading of role allocation? According to the functionist perspective, let me remind you again, every institution has a beneficial role for the society. So does the education system. And in this, according to this slide, the education system plays a very important role in terms of sifting and sorting individuals, allocating roles to individuals according to their abilities, right? Remember when I said the kids who were academically able would go to the grammar school, would study a different curriculum, and would probably be in a better position ahead. In contrast, on the other extreme, if we talk about students who would go to secondary modern schools, they might not continue with higher education. Now, for the ones who've already done this, you might have an idea about how and why this tripartite system was later on replaced by comprehensive education system. We, I'm assuming a few of you would also have an idea about the flaws that were there, the problems that emerged because of this tripartite system. I do know, and I'd want you all to keep in mind as well, that I mean, we're talking about categorizing kids at the age of 11. They're too young. I know this was flawed, this was considered to be later on considered to be flawed, and this had to be replaced. But then again, this is something that happened. And if we're talking about this under the ring of the functionist perspective, according to the functionist perspective, the education system plays a very important role in terms of role allocation, allocating roles to individuals in a society on the basis of the abilities they have, how capable they are, right? In the UK in 1944, the Education Reform Act introduced the tripartite system. The new system was introduced with the intention of reducing inequality, if not eliminate it completely. Nice. I like that one. The intention over here was to reduce inequality if you cannot eliminate it totally, completely, right? And they thought, I mean, the assumption over here is that this system was introduced with the intention कि देखिए आप इनक्वालिटी को ख़त्म तो नहीं कर सकते। अगर आप सबको एक ही तरह की अपॉर्चुनिटी दे रहे हैं, अगर आप सबको 11 साल की एज में एक ही तरह के टेस्ट पे बिठा के उस टेस्ट की बेसिस पे उनको आगे कैटेगराइज कर रहे हैं, राइट? In that case, this might be fair because everyone got the same opportunity. Everyone got to sit for that 11 plus exam. I do know eventually the grammar schools had very few students, and the very few students that went to the grammar school, they were majorly from upper classes. I know all of that, but then again, we're studying this under the heading of the functions perspective. Remember that, right? So the tripartite system established free universal education, explicitly addressed the relationship between education and the workplace through a difference or a distinction, right? We a distinction between academic school students and vocational students. Academic students would be destined to move on to university and professional employment. However, when we talk about vocational students, they were destined to follow a particular technical route into the workplace, be carpenter, plumber, an electrician, any skilled work, right? So, according to the functions perspective again, the education system is playing its role in terms of allocating roles to individuals based on their abilities and based on their willingness towards putting in effort, right? Because remember, the education system is giving credit or accrediting your knowledge, right? If you're qualified, if you do well in your test, you take a different route. If you do not do well, you take a different route, right? Now, secondary ages between 11 to 15, education was organized into a three-type tripartite system. This is what I just spoke about. I'm just reading through this. Students were allocated to one of the three type of schools after taking an intelligence test at age 11. The types of schools not only followed contemporary beliefs about the nature of intelligence, they also reflected current economic needs in terms of type of labor. We had the grammar schools, we had the secondary technical schools, and we had secondary modern schools. I'm hoping we all have understood this, right? We're talking about how this division, according to the function, see the functionists claim it, this division is pretty essential, right? And this is essential, this is functional, and this is necessary, right? And we very clearly see this. We have the technical board in Pakistan as well. I don't know if you know this or you don't, but we do have the technical board in Pakistan. And and one more thing I like sharing, your A levels is equivalent to intermediate, and intermediate is equivalent to the diploma that you get from the technical board, just in case you didn't know. Now, countries like Pakistan and Mauritius, along with the UK, have this division in the secondary education system. The separation of academic and vocational educational routes reflects a belief in two basic forms of work. Number one, people who'd have professional careers and people who'd have non professional work, right? Moving on, if we take this concept of education and role allocation further, this was put forward by Davis and Moore, and their functionalists. They're there at the right extreme. According to them, let me explain this to you first. According to them, the education system sifts and sorts individuals according to their intelligence and ability and allocates them to appropriate schools or courses. It's the education system's responsibility to sift and sort individuals according to their intelligence, ability, and their willingness towards putting in effort, right? Now, yes, they are hinting on the education system being meritocratic because they're functional, because they're functionalists. And according to the functions perspective over here, the education system stratifies or categorizes individuals. To give you a simple example over here, you know what? If I talk about someone who has done chartered accountancy, and if I compare that with someone who has a BCom degree, right? BCom is Bachelor's in Commerce, and Chartered Accountancy is a certification. Nonetheless, everyone sitting over here does know if you have done your Chartered Accountancy, you're earning a lot more, right? And this, according to, and when you're talking about someone stepping into chartered accountancy, you wouldn't do that if you do not get the right amount of grades through the education system. I know there's no such prerequisite for chartered accountancy, but then again, not everyone ends up finishing his chartered accountancy or her chartered accountancy, right? So according to Davis and Moore, the education system plays a very important role over here in terms of sifting and sorting individuals, sorting out, categorizing, typifying, classifying individuals in terms of their intelligence, their ability, and their willingness towards putting in effort. That has to be reflected in terms of good grades, and that is when they get a different route from someone who either chooses not to do this or is unable to do this, right? Now, Davis and Moore see social stratification as a mechanism for ensuring that the most talented and able members of society are allocated to those positions that are functionally most important for society. Now, individuals being allocated to positions that are functionally more important for a society. A chartered accountant would be sitting in his amazing workplace and making decision worth billions. Bachelor's in commerce, a BCom might not, right? So the roles that have a higher value are allocated to individuals through the education system who have put in more of efforts, who have, now, like I had a couple of minutes back said, the education system according to the functions perspective is pretty meritocratic. Is based on the principles of meritocracy, right? If you're putting in effort, if you're getting through, if I stick to the example that I just gave, if you finish your chartered accountancy, you'd have a better lifestyle, you'd have more of incentives, more of money, a better life to live, right? And to put it into theory, everyone gets the same opportunity. You can all compete, but the ones who are talented enough would be able to get through. The ones who are not talented enough would probably not be able to get through, right? The education system is an important part of this process. In Davis's word, it is the proving ground for ability and hence the selective agency for placing people in different statuses according to their capacities. It is a proving ground for ability and hence the selective agency for people in different statuses, a selective agency for placing people in different statuses according to their capabilities, right? Thus, the education system sifts, sorts, and grades individuals in terms of the talents and abilities. It rewards the most talented with high qualification, which in turn provide entry to those occupations that are functionally most important to society, right? This suits both individual and society at the same time. Individuals get work for which they are suited, and they are the right number of individuals with the right skills and qualification for all the work that needs to be done, right? And that is why you have so many people who've done charter no so many people who've done the BCom, and there are very few people who get through chartered accountancy, and they've earned that privileged position and status that they get in society, right? The education system can be used to address any balance problems that arise. For example, if more engineers are needed, more courses can be created and more appropriate skills taught in schools. We very often keep on talking about this as well. Kids, when they're having their counseling sessions, this happens at many colleges as well. The counselors advise them according to what the current trend is, like what the segment is the word that I can think of right now, that has more and better jobs to offer, and that is how that helps students decide what course would they want to take, or what career path would they want to pursue, right? Now, this was role allocation by Davis and Moore. I tried giving you all basics on functionalism. We spoke about the last we spoke about was role allocation by Davis and Moore. Before that, we spoke about role allocation in general. Before that, we spoke about the education system playing its role in terms of an agent that helps with secondary socialization. Before that, we spoke about how the education system brings in social solidarity. We did discuss the tribunal system in between as well. Once we're done with that, let's have a look at this, and let's have a look at how the functionalist perspective has been criticized. To remind you all, like I said, I keep on saying, when I'm teaching you the functionist perspective, I sound like a die-hard functionist. The moment this perspective is over, we'd evaluate it, scrutinize it, look for flaws in it. And then when we move to another perspective, in this case, after the Marxist perspective, I'd again sound like a die-hard Marxist. I'm deliberately doing this so that I help you understand this in a better manner. Right now, moving on, let's have a look at the criticisms that the functionist perspective has faced. While discussing the criticism, let's start off with what Tuman has to say. Number one, we spoke about, according to Davis and Moore, to be specific, they claimed the education system sifts, sorts, grades individuals, and allocates them to positions according to their ability, allocates them to the jobs in terms of the functional importance of a job, right? Now, in that case, the question that rises over here is, how do you think, or do you even think there is any objective mechanism through which we can figure out the functional importance of a job? No, we cannot, right? Who is to decide what's more important? If we talk about, to explain this to you, if we talk about the janitorial staff, they don't get paid a lot. Have you ever imagined how things would be like if in Karachi the janitorial staff calls for a strike for a week? There'd be so many people dying if it is for more than a week. It is going to create a mess everywhere, right? So the point is, we do not have any mechanism, any objective mechanism. Objective is without bias. We do not have any objective mechanism through which we can figure out which job is more important. One. Number two, functionalists very openly, time and again, keep on claiming that the education system is meritocratic. However, we have very little evidence that shows us that the education system is actually meritocratic. Meritocratic is something that is based on merit. Or in other words, if you work hard, you do well. We hardly have any evidence that supports this. Number three, let me number them one by one. Let's make this one, let's make this two. Number three, according to the interactionist perspective. Now, when we talk about the interactionist perspective, remember, interactionists focus on conducting studies on a micro level, right? In other words, in this context, they are referring to in school factors that affect the educational performance, attainment, achievement of a pupil. Now, according to the interactionist perspective, your in school factors, the things that happen at school during school hours, from pupil subcultures to the involvement that the management has, to the role the teachers play, all of this has a significant contribution towards how well a child does at school, which might not make it very meritocratic. Number four, let's talk about the Marxist perspective over here. The very vocal one, according to the Marxist perspective, this meritocracy that we're talking about, it is a myth. It is an illusion. The education system likes to keep people under an impression that it works on meritocratic principles. However, in reality, it does not. And since we're doing A2s over here, I'd like to assume everyone sitting over here does have an idea about the Marxist perspective, the basics on Marxist perspective, right? The fourth point over here, we spoke about, I'd like to go back to the idea that was put forward by Davis and Moore. According to them, your academic credentials have a lot to do with your occupational reward. Realistically speaking, if I ask you this question, do you think it is that way? There are so many people who are doctors by profession, who have done their specialization too, and who might not be doing well, or relatively who might not be doing well if you compare them with other people who are, let's just say, contractors who aren't that educated and qualified enough. Though if I have a look at this fifth point, the relationship between academic credentials and occupation rewards is not particularly very close. Get this? Oh, this is the fifth point, right? In other words, your income has a weak link with your educational attainment. Number six now, when we talk about the education system, as we've been discussing earlier, the education, according to the functionist perspective, the education system grades people in terms of their ability. In particular, it has been argued that intelligence has little effect upon educational attainment, right? We've spoken about intelligence playing a very important role in terms of helping people determine, helping, I forgot what I just said. We have spoken about the role intelligence plays in terms of helping the education system determine who's capable of what. However, realistically speaking, there's again a very weak link when it comes to the education system. There's a very weak link when it comes to the education system and intelligence. There are sociological commentators who claim it's not the level of intelligence that reflects how good someone does in their examination. It's the level of conformity towards that particular subject, right? For instance, let me give this example to you all. There are so many people who are so intelligent, but if you're not answering your questions, even when you talk about a sociology examination, according to what the examiner expects from you, you're not getting your grades. In that case, how important is your intelligence then? Right? So, I hope everyone has understood the criticisms that we have discussed. And of course, these points have to be, I've highlighted them, these points have to be developed further. And once we're done with the functionist perspectives, the basics on functionist perspectives on education, we'd move on towards the Marxist perspective over here, right? Moving on, let's get started with the Marxist perspective over here. Karl Marx doesn't require any introduction, shouldn't by now, since we're towards an end to our A2s. We're revising, and Karl Marx, born 1818, died 1883. Karl Marx claimed the problem, a major problem that the society has in terms of inequality of wealth. According to Karl Marx, a society comprises of two major groups, the bourgeois and the proletariats, where the bourgeois are the people who own means of production, they're the rich, the elite, who not only do own means of production, but at the same time they have the power, potential, and capacity to be able to mold things according to the way they want them to be. And in that case, according to them, the education system is controlled by these wealthy bourgeois as well. The education system is controlled by them. It's owned by them, it's controlled by them. They make the education system work in a manner that it benefits them, that it benefits the capitalist system, because it's the capitalist system through which these bourgeois maximize the amount of profits that they're making, right? Now, this was when you talk about a bourgeois. On the other extreme, we have the proletariats over here. When we talk about the proletariats, we're talking about people who work for a wage, people who work for a salary. In this case, we're talking about a layman, a common man, right? A common man who does not own means of production and who is very vulnerable towards very vulnerable and can be exploited and is exploited by the bourgeois according to the Marxist perspective, right? So to start off with, we discussing the Marxist view on about how education contributes to the maintenance of capitalist economic system. How is it that the education system contributes towards the maintenance of this capitalist education, the capitalist economic system, right? Now, to start off with, let's let's discuss how the Marxists claim that the education system benefits the capitalist system. Remember, or keep in mind the word bourgeois. I'm sure you do know this. Bourgeois are the people who own means of production. The people who own means of production, they require constant reproduction of labor force. Not only do they require labor force, but they require the labor force to have the knowledge, the skills that are essential for them to have to be able to run the education system the way it is supposed to be run. Another thing, you know what, when we talk about, just imagine we do not have, if we wouldn't have had this education system, how do you think the workers would have had, or the employees that an organization hires would have the knowledge and skills that it is supposed to have, right? An organization with employees who are not knowledgeable enough, who do not have skills, do you think they'd be of any good to the organization? They might not be able to, right? Now, according to the Marxist perspective, right? According to the Marxist perspective, through formal education or formal curriculum, and at the same time through hidden curriculum, both the education system benefits the capitalist system. Through formal curriculum, individuals get to learn the knowledge, they get to learn the skills that are essential, right? Through the hidden curriculum, through the school experiences they have, individuals or pupils in this case, they learn the characteristics that help them fit into the capitalist system well. For instance, the education system, we discuss this further in detail when we speak about Bowles and Gintersits here, right? How they claim that the education system provides individuals who are submissive, docile, workaholic, achievement oriented, uncritical. All of these characteristics, according to the Marxist perspective, are pretty essential, right? You wouldn't want to, if you own an organization, you wouldn't want to hire people who are critical of the way you're running the show. You wouldn't want to hire people who argue. You wouldn't want to hire people who are not submissive, who are not obedient towards authority. According to the Marxist perspective, not only does the education system teach the knowledge and the skills that are essential for the economic system, the capitalist economic system, to be maintained and and growth should be is another factor too. But at the same time, along with knowledge and skills, the characteristics play a very important role over here as well. And all of this is done through the education system. Right now, taking this a step further, if we talk about the benefits of the education system for capitalism, according to Bowles and Ginters, they believe that the formal parts of the curriculum corresponds to the needs of capitalist employers by providing a surplus of skilled workforce, right? By providing a surplus of skilled labor. Now, let me talk about this term. No, this one. Surplus of skilled labor. When you talk about the surplus of skilled labor, you know what? The more educated people they are, the more stronger the capitalist system keeps on getting. I'll tell you how. You know what? The more educated people there are, the more chances there are that the bourgeois would be able to threaten them. I mean, if there's someone who's educated, if there's someone who's working for you, if they aren't really happy with the way your organization works, they might not really be in a position to bargain with you, They might not be in a position to bargain with you because they know if they show nakhras, there are so many others who would want to take their job. So, providing with the surplus of skilled labor strengthens the position of bourgeois in a capitalist economic system. This maintains a high rate of unemployment and ensures that workers of all levels of skills have to compete with each other for jobs. Employers can pay low wages through being able to threaten dismissal and replacement by the reserve army of skilled workers. And I'm assuming everyone gets why we're referring to this as a reserve army of skilled workers, because if these ones have problems with the way the system is being run, you can simply replace them with the ones who are already there in the waiting list, looking for, dying for the job that you're there to offer, right? Since the mental requirement of most jobs are quite low and most skills can be learned on the job, education tends to overeducate the workforce. Now we could talk about this quite a lot, but I wouldn't want to make this any longer. Okay, I'm trying not to make this more detailed, but see, if you're overeducating the workforce, if I give you a simple example, there are so many jobs people do. For instance, the job of a teller at a bank or someone who sits at the cash counter. You can train anyone to do that. But then again, they require a master's degree. There are so many banks they do, right? They're hiring people, they're deliberately hiring people who are overeducated for the work that they are to perform. And what does this do? This makes people compete with each other. And this competition further strengthens the bourgeois. Yeah, I hope we get this. Moving on. According to the Marxist perspective, again, the education system keeps individuals under an illusion of equality of opportunity, right? Under an illusion of equality of opportunity. In other words, the education system makes a point that people are kept under an impression, that a layman, that a common man, that these proletariats are kept under an impression that the education system operates on meritocratic principles. Now, for heaven's sake, do not confuse this with the functionist perspective. According to the functionist perspective, the education system is meritocratic. According to the Marxist perspective, the education system keeps people under an illusion of meritocracy, under an illusion that there's equality within the education system, which, in other words, means that the Marxists believe that this equality in reality does not exist, right? Now, the illusion of equality of opportunity, the idea that we all compete on equal terms, is an illusion. Although education is free and open to all, and despite the fact that individuals can apply for jobs at will, Bowles and Gintis claim that some have greater opportunity than others. And guess what? When we talk about these some we are actually referring to kids from the privileged background, pupils from the privileged background. They have, according to the Marxist perspective, again, a greater opportunity than others. The children of the wealthy, the children of the powerful, they tend to obtain high qualifications and highly rewarded jobs irrespective of their abilities. The education system disguises this, keeps them under impression that it operates on the principles of meritocracy, with its myth of meritocracy, as we may refer to it as the myth of meritocracy. Those who denied success, they simply end up blaming themselves. They wouldn't blame the system, they blame themselves, right? Now, they blame the system because they are told directly and indirectly, time and again, that they're a part of a system where everyone gets the same opportunity. They're getting the same opportunity. If they want to, they do well. If they don't want to, they wouldn't. Or if they're capable enough, they do well. If they're not capable enough, they wouldn't. Right? I hope everyone does understand both of these headings. The first one being the benefits of the education system for capitalism, that we discuss in terms of formal curriculum and hidden curriculum both. And number two, the illusion of equality of opportunity that the education system portrays. right? Now, moving on, I'd like to discuss Bowles and Gintis in detail over here. I'd want everyone to read through this. Bowles and Gintis came up with this amazing idea of this correspondence principle, where we talk about the relationship between the education system and workplace. But I'd want everyone to read through this once. Now, when we talk about Bowles and Gintis over here, they argue that remember, I just mentioned the correspondence principle over here, right? And as we refer to the correspondence principle over here, we're referring to, or rather, Bowles and Gintis are referring to the correspondence between the organization, that is the workplace, with the education system. We'd be referring to the similarities between the inequalities that are there in the education system, and how those inequalities reflect what I just say. We're talking about the inequalities that are there in the at the workplace as an organization, and how these inequalities are reflected through the education system as well, right? In a simpler manner, we're talking about the similarities that an individual experiences at the workplace with the similarities with the education system. Right now, Bowles and Gintis argue that the structure and organization of the workplace is copied in the organization of schools. This is what I just said. Workplace inequalities are reflected and reproduced through the education system in the following ways. Number one, the school disciplines students to the demands of work, right? Remember a couple of minutes back when I had spoken about, on the previous slide, when I had spoken about how the education system, through the hidden curriculum, instills the characteristics that are essential for an individual to be able to fit into the to be able to fit into the capitalist economic system. Right now, the school disciplines students to the demands of work, and the crucial ingredient of job adequacy. Remind yourselves when I said you wouldn't want to, as an employer, as an owner of an organization, you wouldn't want to hire someone who's not submissive, who doesn't obey to whatever you say. Right now, this involves behaviors such as regular attendance, that is a must at schools, colleges. Control of personal time and space. If it's the time for you to be in the class, you're supposed to be in your class, sitting on your chair, right? Your personal time, your personal space, all of this is very tightly regulated by the education system. And don't you think all of this happens at workplace too? If your work starts at 9, you're supposed to be there on your seat at 9, right? You, even if there's no work, you're not supposed to leave. If your work ends at 5, you leave your workplace at 5, not before that. Right now, so the education system decides where students should be and when they should be there. Where students should be and when they should be there. Yeah, the time, the space, right? One. Number two, social relationships within the school copy the relationships found at work. There is, for example, a structure within the school similar to the workplace, right? Remember hierarchy. The students are answerable to the teacher to the principal to the owner. Likewise, when you at your workplace, you are answerable to your boss to his boss, her boss, and that his boss, her boss to the, there's a structure, there's hierarchy, and then down the lane you have the board of directors or the owner too. Right now, with teachers exercising authority over students, right, obedience to authority. Initially you taught all of this at school, which later is put to use by the bourgeois by strengthening their position, right? Which is again making the capitalist system stronger. Number three, just as workers have no control or ownership of the things they produce, students at the same time have no control over the education system, right? The teacher gets to decide what he or she wants to teach, when to teach what, how to teach what, right? A student hardly has any say. So is the case with the workplace. If you're an employee, you don't get to decide what happens when, what is to be produced, how it is to be produced. It's ultimately the owner who gets to decide all of that. We could bring in the term alienation over here as well. Like like a worker feels alienated at a workplace, we could say a student feels equally alienated at or when he or she is a part of the education system. Remember, whatever I'm saying this according to the Marxist perspective, which again is very different from what we just studied half an hour back, the functionist perspective. Right now, the education process as a whole, they must simply do as they told. We're talking about students, the content or education, this is decided by others. The teaching and learning process, students are encouraged to compete against each other for grades and qualifications rather than see knowledge and understanding as goals in their own right. You're all sitting over here, quite a lot of you, listening to whatever I'm saying, with the idea that somewhere that with the idea that this might end up helping you when you sit for your CAIE examination, right? You are made to compete with each other. You're listening to whatever I'm saying over here because somewhere in your mind you've been told, at times pretty directly, at times in a subtle manner, that this is going to help you for your examination. So is the case when you talk about a workplace. The work process, even if it's assembly line work, the worker hardly has any say. The worker is simply supposed to do what the seniors ask him or her to do, which eventually is coming from the boss, right? Moving on. For Bowles and Gentis, the correspondence principle is maintained at all levels of the education system, usually through streaming, setting, and banding. For those who are destined for lower levels of work, rule following is emphasized. Students are given little responsibility and made to do simple, repetitive work. We're talking about kids who are, to put it in a simpler manner, the kids who are seen to be who are seen to follow the what's the word for it, the vocational education route, right? Number two, for those designed for middle levels of work, reliability and some ability to work independently is emphasized. For those designed for higher levels of work, there's an emphasis on working independently and taking some control over their academic work. So we see very clear categorization over here, right? That is done at the school, which corresponds eventually to your workplace, to your professional life, right? Moving on. Now, if we take this a step further and we talk about education as an instrument of ideological control and cultural reproduction, right? Education as an instrument of ideological control and cultural reproduction. And remember, we're studying this under the heading of Marxist perspective. I'm sure you remember this gentleman, Althusser and his concept of ideological state apparatus. When I talk about the ideological state apparatus, I've been saying this over and over again. To be able to understand this, we need to, I mean, it's a simple trick. If it works for many, I don't know if it would work for you. You should read it the other way around. It is something like this: an apparatus that is used by the state to change the ideology of individuals. I repeat, ideological state apparatus. An apparatus that is used by the state to change the ideology of individuals, right? Now, when we talk about the when we talk about ISA over here, according to Althusser, the education system, just like many other structures or institutions, plays the role of ISA over here, right? The education system is used by the bourgeois or by the elite or by the rich or by the upper class to change the ideology of individuals. The education system over here, my dear, in this context is being referred to as an apparatus or a mechanism that is used by the state, right? A state, a government that is, of course, under the control of bourgeois, to change the ideology, to change the way people think, right? A mechanism that is used by the state to change the ideology of individuals. And over here, in this context, we're referring to how the education system plays the role of ISA. To remind you again, we're doing this under the heading of the Marxist perspective. Right now, the formal curriculum plays an important role in cultural reproduction because it allows children of different classes to be separated into different employment streams at an early age. In this way, cultural reproduction is disguised as a consequence of the choice children make. As a consequence of the choice children make and the differing levels of ability or aptitude. Now, when we talk about the choice individuals make or children make, you know, the children from or the pupils from the working class, they at times blamed for not continuing education. It is of course a choice that they're making, right? Remember, in the UK, you cannot leave school till a particular age, right? Once you're 16, and if you decide to leave school, you may, right? In this context, I mean, it could be because of any reason, but it is the child, it is the pupil, it is the child of a poor man or a children or children from the working class who are themselves deciding to let go of the education system, to leave education, right? One. Moving on, Althusser claims schools are an ideological state apparatus that involves social learning. Teachers transform pupil consciousness by encouraging them to accept not just the realities of life, that the workplace is unequal, but also their likely future social position. A teacher can, according to this, in a very subtle manner, transform a student's consciousness by letting him or her know what his or her position is in the society, so that tomorrow, if the child is not if a child is not able to get to a position where he or she wanted to, they don't blame the system, because from an early age, probably in a very subtle manner, they're told time and again that they're not doing well, their results are not as par, the results do not reflect a good future social position for them, right? In this respect, vocational education within schools has two main advantages for the ruling elite. Right now, we talking about the consequence of the choice children make, right? I give you an option of the school, of the children from the working class leaving school. Number two, the children who opt for vocational education, right? Now the question is, and of course this comes without saying, when you talk about children who are opting for vocational education, they are usually from the working class background, right? Now, how is it that this has benefits for the ruling elite, that further strengthens the capitalist system, right? Now, it eliminates working class children as competitors for high level occupation. So I'll tell you how it went. The rich, the poor, right? They were together. And not actually together, but let's just take it like this for now, right? And then slowly and gradually, as they keep on proceeding, the poor, they opt out, they move on for vocational education, right? And when they move on for vocational education, the rich have less competition ahead, right? If they have less competition ahead, don't you think it would work out well for the children of the rich? One. Number two, it gives the, let me highlight this, eliminates working class children as competitors. Number two, it gives the appearance of being chosen by the working class, right? Either through deliberate choice or because they have failed to reach a required level of academic achievement, right? Either they'd opt out of the education or they'd opt for vocational education themselves. If they do not, majority of them They might end up failing on and not being able to, and even if it's not failing, they might not be able to get the right percentage. If we talk about the system you all go through, right, they might not be able to get the required percentage to be able to pursue education further. And if they're not able to do that, this again means you are, you as the ruling elite, right, you have succeeded in keeping the majority, the working class, under an impression that there was choice for them. They could have put in efforts and continued with their education, or they could have not opted out of school, or they could have not opted for vocational education. Get it? According to Bates and Riceborough, main feature of vocational education in the UK is that most white middle class students follow the academic route into professional employment, whereas white and black from the working class are encouraged along the vocational route to lower level, lower status, lower pay jobs. Get it? In other words, if I highlight what's important over here, middle class students follow academic routes and working class students encouraged to follow the vocational route. Get it? Moving on. According to Dan Finn, let's talk about this concept of youth training schemes. What exactly are these youth training schemes? Now, to give you an example of a youth training scheme, let me explain this to you all first. Now, you know what? A youth training scheme. I'm deciding if I should provide you with a lot of information or with just enough to get through. Let's do it. Okay. Now, when you talk about these youth training schemes, you know what? There was once youth training schemes back in the latter part of the last century. They were introduced, and these youth training schemes were, to put it in a simplistic manner, they were like internship programs that we have nowadays, these days, right? These internship programs or these youth training schemes, they, according to this, help the rich, the elite, the bourgeois, and the capitalist economic system in general through many ways. For instance, you know what? Uh, if we talk about the states, if I talk about the states' involvement over here, right? You know what? If there's a lot of unemployment, if there's a lot of unemployment during any political government's tenure, it's not considered to be a very good thing. And in that case, if there's any such scheme like this, the YTS, the youth training scheme that is introduced, this can actually help the government in terms of showing lesser rate of unemployment. You know what, if there are a lot of people who are unemployed, right, and out of those a lot of people, you give them an option of being a part of YTS, they are technically getting a job, which doesn't make them unemployed anymore. And if there more people into YTS, that means there are lesser people who are unemployed. That, in other words, means that the unemployment statistics, they're coming down. Right now, when the unemployment statistics they come down, doesn't this portray a very good image of the government? If you understood this, I hope you did. Right? One. Number two, you know what, when you have people who are a part of this YTS or the youth training schemes, you're keeping them under an impression that you're training them so that they could do well when they are a part, or when they actually do get a proper job, right? However, now just to explain this to you, do you think internships, I mean, if any one of you has ever been an internee, I'd like to remind you, I'll sound like Marxist here. The things that they make internees do over here, they'd teach you to make very good coffee. They teach you to pile up the files, sort out files, categorize them, clean the workspace. It doesn't always teach you the right amount of skills that they promise they would, that they leave a common man, a layman, under impression that they would, right? And in that case, if I ask you, sounding like a Marxist here, what is the difference between an internship and a job? You know what? You get paid when you're doing a job. If you're an internee, not really, right? Now, according to Dan Finn, he argues that YTS involved cheap labor. We're referring to this as cheap labor over here that employers could use for a short time and then discard without any penalty, right? Now, we're talking about developed countries like the UK, right? You cannot just simply discard your employees at your whenever you feel like. If someone's working for you, they could sue you, they could take you to the court. However, if someone is a part of the YTS, or to put it in a simplistic manner to help you understand this, if someone is an attorney, you have them working for you, you're not paying them, and at times it's a stipend. And if you want to let go of them, you let go of them. You're not really answerable to anyone. Isn't this, I mean, I think this explains this cheap labor wala part quite well, right? Bonded trainees who left a job risk losing state benefits and were effectively tied to a particular employer, whatever the conditions of the job. Many trainees were either placed on work creation schemes devised and funded by the government or in work offering no prospect of further employment once the training period was over and the government's subsidy ended. Finn argues that training was minimal and non existent. Here you go. Here, if we can connect dots, right? Finn argues that training was minimal to non existent in many types of work placement, and where training was given, it did not cover the skills required for work in a high technology service based economy. Like I said, they teach you how to make good coffee, they teach you how to keep your workspace and your boss's workspace clean by organizing things, by filing what was required, by sorting out things, or by being a chotu, right? Now, according to Davies, this is a more blunt one here. According to Davies in 2012, such schemes such as the YTS have been accused of being modern slave labor that involves little or no training at all. Right? Now, I hope everyone has understood Dan Finn and youth training schemes over here. Taking it a step further, if we speak about this gentleman, this amazing gentleman, amazing looking gentleman, Pierre Bourdieu, right? Now, Pierre Bourdieu, let's have a look at what Pierre Bourdieu has to say over here. And remember, we're doing all of this under the heading of the Marxist perspective, the role of education system for the society, right? In the society, rather, right? Now, the relationship between education and economy, therefore, is based around cultural reproduction. This means through which higher social classes reproduce. Nice. I like the beauty here. Higher social classes reproduce the economic domination from generation to generation, and they're able to do so through the education system as well, right? Not only through the education system, and the education system has its own contribution over here as well. Now, I believe this idea of cultural reproduction would be quite clear over here. The idea over here is to be able to reproduce inequalities, the economic domination that the bourgeois, that the rich, that the elite, that the powerful have, right? Maintaining this economic domination from generation to generation. Someone rich would have their children being rich enough, if not richer, and this goes on and on and on and on and on, right? For Bourdieu, according to Pierre Bourdieu, meritocracy is a myth. We've said this, I mean, I've said this at least twice earlier, but this is a person, it's Pierre Bourdieu. He was the one who came up with this. right? For Pierre Bourdieu, meritocracy is a myth. The education system works in favor of the ruling elite in various ways. Some involve the ability to pay for exclusive forms of education, such as private schooling and tutoring, while others relate to educational practices such as streaming, where children of different abilities are taught separately. We are talking about now. Remember what I just said over here. We have discussed the same thing a couple of slides back when we were discussing education system keeping individuals under an illusion of equality of opportunity. It is an illusion, right, of equality of opportunity, because there is no equality in terms of opportunities. A child from a rich privileged background definitely is in a better position as compared to a child from a working class background. Through private schooling, through tutoring, get it? Moving on. Meritocracy is, however, a justifying or legitimating myth for Bourdieu. The education has system has the appearance of fairness, right? The education system, according to Bourdieu, has the appearance of fairness. It would look like, it would portray itself, it as in the education system, right? The education system would portray itself to be pretty meritocratic, based on equality, based on fair and just rules and regulations and principles. And by doing so, they end up legitimizing the way things are, when in fact it is the opposite. The education system, according to Bourdieu, is unfair, unequal, and without any merit. You're legitimizing things, or in other words, you're making it look like it is legit, it is fair. We get this, right? I hope we all do get this. we'd I'd like to we'd evaluate the Marxist perspective on the role of education here, and I'd like everyone to read this first. Once you're done reading through this, we would take this a step ahead. Moving on, if we evaluate the Marxist perspective over here, remember when I said while teaching Marxism, I'll sound like a die-hard Marxist. Once done with Marxism, I'd be the one who would evaluate it for you, right? I mean, you could do this with me as well. Now, when we talk about the word evaluation, evaluation doesn't necessarily mean criticism, but in this context, it is criticism that we have over here, right? Now, when we talk about the criticism that the Marxist perspective has faced over here, right? According to Young, they've questioned. I mean, there's so many things that could go against the Marxist perspective over here. For instance, if we talk about how the Marxists claim that the education system functions or it operates to just meet the needs of ruling class, right? This has been questioned by so many people. But there's another thing that is not over here. I'd like to bring that in over here as well. You know what? They say, I mean, when I say they over here, I'm referring to the Marxists claim that the education system benefits the capitalist system, benefits industrialization, right? Do you know what? Education system is older if you compare in terms of time and age. Education system, इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन कैपिटलिज्म से पहले की चीज़ है, ठीक है? तो अगर आप कहते हो कि एजुकेशन सिस्टम सिर्फ और सिर्फ कैपिटलिस्ट सिस्टम और इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन को बेनिफिट करने के लिए बना है, तो पहले क्या करता था? Question mark, right? Let's move on and stick to this slide. We don't have much of time and it's late already. According to Young, questioned the idea that education functions to meet the needs of a ruling class. Marxists have also been criticized for seeing working class pupils as passive, seeing working class pupils as passive, or in other words, I mean, don't you think like it? Don't you think like the don't you think like the Marxists are making it sound like an idealistic situation where the teachers come, they transform pupils consciousness, they say whatever the education system runs however the education system wants to have wants to generate a workforce that is submissive, docile, workaholic, achievement oriented, target oriented, uncritical, use as many adjectives as you want over here. Do you actually think things work out like this? Do you actually think kids are passive? Do you actually think pupils are passive? You're a student too over here. Do you think it works like this? There are so many people. Let me put it in a desi manner, it would make more sense to you. There's so many people, there's so many students in the education system, kuch nahi bigad pata, right? They'd go about their way, finding their own ways, doing whatever they want to do. They'd bunk, they'd not put their pen to paper, they do whatever they feel like doing, right? So the assumption that the Marxists have about the education system, having a working class, having kids from the working class who are very, very passive and do not play an active role, is probably an over exaggerated version of how things are like, right? Now that we're evaluating this, criticizing this, right? And for making the assumption that everything that is taught in schools is necessarily learned. I mean, I wish, right? Moving on. There's this another study that was conducted by Paul Willis. Paul Willis actually studied a school located in a working class area. And of course, if there's a school that's located in a working class area, what I'm trying to imply over here is the research that Paul Willis did comprised of students from the working class background. And he referred to the students from the working class, there were 12 students in particular, he referred to them as lads, right? And these lads, according to Willis, they were not passive at all. They were anything but passive. They were racist, they were sexist, they would hold pride over not putting the pen to paper, they would bunk, they would not take the system seriously, they would not take the teachers seriously, they would make fun of other students who were the studious ones there, right? They were used to refer to them as ear rolls, sissies, right? And I'm not making this up. All of this is there in his book. He wrote his book in 1977 with the name Learning to Labor. Yeah. Paul Willis, study of working class students in the UK showed that they were not passive. They strongly resisted attempts by teachers to make them conform to school rules and values. The claim that schools prepare people for working life is also problematic here, right? Moving on, having a look at what, let me highlight this. They were not passive. Okay. According to Paulinsis, from a new Marxist perspective, when I use the term neo Marxism, referring to the newer form of Marxism, right? They argue that schools are relatively autonomous institutions. Beat that now. According to Paulinsis, who is a neo Marxist, schools aren't institutions that are simply run and regulated and governed by the state. They're pretty autonomous. They pretty much decide what has to be done how, right? So this again does not go in line with the traditional typical Marxist school of thought, right? Moving on. Paulinsis, from a new Marxist perspective, argues that schools are relatively autonomous institutions which can interpret the curriculum in ways that make it difficult to see how a precise correspondence between the education and work can develop. Right? Again, this is a counter argument to the correspondence theory or the correspondence principle that was put forward by Pauls and Gintis. Right? Moving on, according to Heath over here. Now, you know what? The impression that Marxists tried to leave us with was that the vocational education system in itself is pretty flawed, and it has been deliberately designed and planned up in a manner that it ends up benefiting the rich, the elite. However, according to Heath, this might not be the case. According to her, now let me read this for you so that this makes it easier for you to understand. Heath in 1997 argues that Marxist approaches tend to reject all forms of vocational education because they encourage class based cultural reproduction. They encourage class based cultural reproduction, right? She notes that by demanding equal opportunities, some forms of vocational education have helped women in areas of schooling. They have helped women. Let me grab another color here. Oops, there you go. Now, they have helped women in areas of schooling and eventually work that were traditionally male preserves. Now, you know what? This is again linked to, this is actually about vocational education over here. When you talk about vocational education, the idea over here was that the children from the poor background, the working class background, they are deliberately taught skills that keep them away from the academic and professional route. However, according to Heath, this has actually worked in favor of many women. There were skills that were once considered to be male preserves. There were skills that were once considered to be only for men. Through this formal vocational education option that many female students have today, it has actually worked in their favor in a manner that they have got an option, they've gotten a chance to do things that were initially only expected to be done by men, by males. We get this, right? I hope we do. All right. Now that we're done with the functionist perspective and we're done with the Marxist perspective, let's move on and quickly discuss the new right views on the relationship between education and the economy. Now, let's talk about this new right perspective in relation to the functionist perspective, right? According to the new right perspective, the rapid social and economic changes. But before that, wait. The new right perspective. You've heard about the functionist perspective, you heard about the Marxist perspective earlier. You must not have heard about the new right perspective. Remember, Vita, when you talk about these perspectives over here, a perspective is a point of view, right? A group of people, a bunch of people who believe in a particular, who in particular believe in something, a particular school of thought could be referred to as a perspective over here, right? Now, according to the new right perspective, I'm deliberately not going into details because it has been very late already. Now, according to the new right perspective, the rapid social and economic changes that have occurred over the past 40 years as a result of globalization, the rapid social and economic changes that have occurred over the past 40 years as a result of globalization have significantly impacted the relationship between education and economy, right? They have significantly impacted the relationship between education and economy. Wait, are they trying to hint us on how the functionalist perspective on education isn't really applicable these days anymore, right? Now, moving on, they have significantly impacted the relationship between education and economy. There has been a steady rise in general in the service industry, and more recently a rapid rise in computer-based service technology. Now, I think no one would deny this, right? There was, for the students from the business background, you all would agree to this. You all would know that the difference, initially the difference between the manufacturing sector and the service sector, right? The manufacturing sector, when you're producing products, right, could be anything from this pencil to anything at all, right? And when you talk about service industry has more to do with the services you provide. For instance, you could talk about what hospitals do, what the hoteling industry does. They provide you services. The banking industry, the teaching industry, right? Now, there's been a steady rise in general service industry, and more recently, a rapid rise in computer-based service technologies. We are doing this online right now, and I'm sure no one would deny this, right? So, moving on. Remember when I said we are discussing this in relation to the functions perspective, right? In postmodernist and post-industrial society, therefore, service and knowledge are the dominant productive industries, and these are known for or characterized by the flexibility and speed of change, which again is something you wouldn't say no to. But there's a lot of flexibility, a lot more flexibility than once was, right? And the rapid amount of changes that we're seeing happening today, this has affected everything, and in particular we're referring to the economic system being affected over here, right? And guess what? If the economic system gets affected, so does the education system, right? Because apparently or otherwise, the education system runs to complement the economic system, one of its major roles is to be able to fulfill the requirement of the economic system, to be able to produce knowledgeable skilled workforce so that they could run the economic system, right? For according to the functionist perspective, with all the good intentions, according to the Marxist perspective, to support the capitalist system, right? Now, moving on, remember, in relation to the functionist perspective, the first thing, the second thing that I'd want everyone to keep in mind over here is we are talking about a change being witnessed in the economic system, and this change in the economic system has or would definitely reflect upon the education system as well. In modern education system, the new right argue that the distinction between academic and vocational is too inflexible to meet the needs of a globalized economy. Economic behavior in the 21st century is very different from the past. Various globalizing processes have caused a long-term decline in manufacturing and a rise in the financial and service sectors, what we just discussed. This has changed both the nature of economic production and, as a consequence, the nature of education system needs to change too. Bang, this is what I just said. This. Do we get this? I hope we do. Moving on. Now, in many education systems, these ideas are reflected in recent changes to different types of academic and vocational qualifications. Now, there has been a I mean, if you talk about the last year, this change has been very significant, very evident, and as we do this, as I'm teaching through this online platform over here, this is something that is an example to whatever we're studying over here. Okay. Now, we're talking about the recent changes being there witnessed in different types of academic and vocational qualifications. For instance, the breakdown rigid distinction between academic and vocational subjects through the development of new qualifications. We have new qualifications today that are a combination of both. One. Number two, a move away from the curriculum that is wholly focused on subject knowledge towards one that is based on functional knowledge. Get it? And we have the I'm forgetting the word. We have the Excel board these days. We have IB International Baccalaureate. You've seen how they are focused relatively more when it comes to showing what you're studying rather than just doing theory, right? Number three, with others and solve problems rather than simply remember names and dates. Number three, narrowing down the distinction between different types of knowledge and skills, narrowing it down, right? Like I said, putting them both together. So summing it up, we spoke of the new right perspective. When we spoke of the new right perspective, the idea over here was things are different today from the way things were when functionalists put forward their point of view on this. And because the economic system has changed, this has to reflect on the change. This has to reflect on the education system too, right? I hope we get the new right perspective over here. Moving on, and this happens to be the last perspective. We studied the functions perspective, we studied the Marxist perspective, we studied the new right perspective, and we'd end with the social democratic perspective. 10 more minutes and we're done. As we refer to the social democratic theory over here, social democratic perspective or social democratic theory, while discussing this social democratic theory, let's remind ourselves about the tripartite system. What I had said about the tripartite system was, according to the tripartite system that was introduced through the Education Reform Act in 1944, every child, I mean, the apparent intentions were to come up with a system that reduces inequality if it cannot bring it to an end totally, right? The idea was to make students from different social classes, different genders and ethnicities, all to put them all on same platform, to be able to make all of them sit through the same examination that was based on intelligence, and based on the results of that exam, the students being allocated to different types of schools, ranging from the grammar school to the technical school to the secondary modern school, right? Now, when we talk about the social democratic perspective or social democratic theory, the first thing, when you talk about social democrats, this again is not a purely sociological perspective. Social democrats, there are many sociologists, there are many politicians, educationists, policymakers, economists that together came up with this school of thought. And the social democratic theory, according to this slide, looks at the relationship between education and economy in terms of two related processes, right? Now, I spoke about the tripartite system. According to the social democratic perspective, this tripartite system is, or rather was, a misfit because the tripartite system didn't really work the way it claimed it would, right? If we have a look at how things realistically turned out to be, through this tripartite system, like I had mentioned earlier, majority of the students, they ended up going to the secondary modern schools. And for the ones who did go to the grammar schools, it was a very clear and a significant difference in terms of the social class they belonged to. In other words, what I'm trying to say over here is the pupils who ended up making to the grammar school were majorly from the upper elite classes, right? And based on that, the social democrats, they proposed a change in the system from the tripartite schooling system coming to an end and a new system being introduced known as comprehensive schooling. Now, what exactly is comprehensive schooling? Comprehensive schooling is the way our system runs today, the way you study, right? When you talk about tripartite system, pupils were put into different categories. A particular set of pupils would study particular syllabus, others would study another, and there would be the third category there as well. However, when you talk about comprehensive schooling has more to do with how everyone studies the same curriculum, regardless of how capable you are. If you're an A2 sociology student, you ought to study this. Right? Now, moving on. Social democratic theory looks at the relationship between education and the economy in terms of two related processes in modern societies. Number one, technological changes in the workplace involving both the decline in traditional manufacturing and the rise of service industry in areas such as finance, computing, and information technology. In the UK, for example, the tripartite system produced a small percentage of highly qualified university entrants. Let me do it. Let me highlight this. In the UK, the tripartite system produced a small percentage of highly qualified university entertains, no, entrance hona chahiye. This is wrong. Okay. Now, listen. Like I said a couple of minutes back, there were very few students, right? Over here, this says around 15% of them could actually make up to that, right? And do you know what? This isn't mentioned over here, but I feel like I should be discussing this. You know what? In the longer run, this can turn out to be so problematic for the society. Imagine a society where the majority of your youth has studied a curriculum that is below par, that is below standard. I'm referring to the secondary modern schools. Pupils who went to the secondary modern school were a lot, right? If you compare them with the students who went to the grammar schools, right? A majority lot of your students, they're studying a curriculum that is below par. Do you know what? In the longer run, this can turn out to be so problematic. In the longer run, your society, your country would be shot in terms of a highly qualified, highly educated workforce. Think, right? Now, according to the Social Democrats, the tripartite system produced a small percentage of highly qualified university entrants and a large number of poorly qualified school leavers. This situation failed to meet the economic need for a better qualified service industry workforce. Now, what we're talking about is there being a rapid growth in terms of how the economic system works and operates, and manufacturing industry requiring lesser and lesser amount of people because of continuous what do you call it continuous growth in terms of technology continue because of a rapid amount of growth, like I said, in technology. There would be fewer people would be required, and at the same time a rapid rise in the service industry too, right? On one hand, we're talking about the economic system improving, and on the other hand, we're talking about the education system not being able to fulfill the requirement of this economic system, according to them. Now I'm speaking like a social democrat. Do we get this? I hope we do. Right now, this situation failed to meet the economic need for a better qualified service industry workforce. The first point. The second point, there has been a social change too. Social changes focus on ideas about equality in gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and social class. However, like I had mentioned earlier, statistically speaking, the very few pupils who could actually make it up to the grammar schools were actually from a privileged background. And this, again, very clearly demonstrates that the system was not fair. That even if it apparently was fair, probably the way they were, the pupils at a very young and tender age of 11, when they were questioned on intelligence, the test was designed in a manner that it benefited the children of the rich and elite, right? The tripartite system failed to meet the requirements of social fairness because it was based on ideas about intelligence that were increasingly divided along class lines. Moving on. According to the social democratic perspective, the solution, remember, I just mentioned the solution to these problems in the UK was comprehensive education. There you go. Comprehensive education, a system where everyone gets to study the same, right? Which was designed to address social inequality and technological change. According to the social democratic perspective, if you want a solution to these problems, the solution would be through comprehensive education system, because according to them, this comprehensive education system is designed in a manner that it does address social inequality and technological changes that are there that the society is witnessing. Moving on, social democrats believe that comprehensive schools fulfill the ideal of a meritocracy. These schools contain a broad class mix in which all children, regardless of prior academic achievement, receive the same secondary education. The introduction of the system intended to establish a system of contest mobility. In other words, you get the same chance to compete so that you could experience social mobility. To remind you all, social mobility is moving up or down the social scale. In this case, of course, we're referring to upward social mobility. We're talking about everyone. Since we spoke about the comprehensive education system being able to address social inequality, right? If it's addressing social inequality, we are probably in a position to give the pupils from a poorer background an opportunity, a chance, so that they could experience upward social mobility, right? Moving on. In the UK, the introduction of comprehensive schools was intended to establish a system of equality of opportunity. This was not only seen as socially fair, but in addition, competition would produce larger number of better qualified workers to serve the new technological requirement of a changing economy. We just discussed this, right? The system keeps on improving. There's more newer technological workforce that's required, and according to the social democrats, the tripartite system wasn't really able to do justice to it, and because of that, a newer system, according to them, should have been introduced, which it did: the comprehensive schooling system, the system that you're all a part of, right? From this perspective, therefore, education is he means through which problems is the means. This should be the is the means through which problems of technological change and social inequality can be addressed and managed. A truly meritocratic system would result in a fairer distribution. A truly meritocratic system would result in a fairer distribution of economic and social rewards, increased social mobility, and a decline in social inequality. Okay, it's not that this social democratic perspective isn't without any flaws. They are there that we would be discussing. However, nonetheless, let's talk about what they believed in, what they claimed, right? How they claimed the comprehensive education system could help the economic system. More recently, social democratic theory has argued for the need to retain and refocus the workforce. This should be retrain. This is retrain, to retrain and refocus the workforce in contemporary societies to address both economic and social changes, right? According to Chitty, notes this involves seeing, I like this one, involves seeing education and training as a means through which industrial societies are transformed from a low skill, low wage economies into high skill, high wage, and technologically advanced economies. According to them, this all of this can be done through comprehensive schooling system. You could transform a low skilled, low wage economy into a high skill, high wage, technologically advanced economy. Get it? And according to Chitty, this could be done through the education system, right? Being specific, the comprehensive education system. Moving on towards the evaluation, and then we bringing this to an end finally. Evaluation. While social democrats see comprehensive schooling as a way of reducing class inequality by creating more opportunities for working class children, Marxists argue that the fundamental economic inequalities are not affected by educational changes. There you go, a very evident one here. According to the social democrats, comprehensive education system can actually reduce class inequality, and I'm sure you would know this already. Marxists wouldn't really give in that easily. According to the Marxist perspective, if there has to be, if there has to be a society that does not have inequality in it, it is only possible through a revolution. According to the Marxist perspective, it is the capitalist system being brought to an end that is going to bring inequality to an end. According to the Marxist perspective, the education system cannot really do much, because education system, again, according to them, right, according to the Marxist perspective, the education system works the way the bourgeois want it to work, and it would be too trivial or too tiny of a thing to be done by bringing in changes in the education system through bringing in changes in policies, introducing a new system like the comprehensive education system that could actually address social inequality. According to them, if social inequality is to be addressed, it is to be done by bringing the capitalist system to an end, right? That they believe is the solution. Moving on, according to Bowles and Gentis, they argue that the reverse is true. Economic inequality drives educational inequality. This is a nice one again. Economic inequality drives educational inequality. Like I said, you bring economic inequality to an end. How would you do that? You bring capitalism to an end. Capitalism to an end. And if you do succeed in bringing in capitalism to an end, you would bring in equality in the education system and in the society overall, right? Moving on, the last one for today. According to Wilkinson and Pickett, they argue that social inequality in the UK is greater now than any in that at any time in the past 50 years. Bang, that's a sad one. According to Wilkinson and Pickett. Okay, now let me put this to you through this context. See, the tripartite system was introduced after the 1944 Education Reform Act, right? And the tripartite system being brought to an end and this comprehensive education system being introduced, which the social democrats very openly, vocally advocate, support, propose. This was introduced back in the 1970s. As I speak right now, it's 2021. 70s, 30 years from there, right? And 20 more. According to Wilkinson and Beckett in 2009, they claimed that social inequality is today more than it ever has been. Remember, according to social democrats, comprehensive education system can bring social inequality to an end. According to Wilkinson and Beckett, which this isn't what has happened. Had the comprehensive education system been that effective, it would have reduced social inequality. But if you have a look at social inequality in the UK today, according to them, for the third time now, is more than it has ever been. Now that we're done with,
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
sir.
I have one question.
Thank you,
Thanks, sir.
sir.
you're welcome. This was pretty much it. Take care of
Yeah, I
yourself.
have a question.
Okay, wait. Stay happy, healthy, safe, and protected. Stay humble, spread positivity, spread smiles. If you have a question, you stay back, rest and leave. Take good care of yourselves, and Allah Hafiz.